I'm going to talk about based things, sequencing, preconfirmations, and ideology. All right. So background on me, I'm the co-founder of Spire Labs. We build the best based rollups. We also dabble in preconfirmations, and all of us are very aligned on the based ideology. So first, base sequencing, based rollups. We're going to walk through a definition for all of these. I have a somewhat different definition than other people, and so I just want to make it clear that there's these three properties to be a base rollup. I think you need all three, and some people think you only need one, some people think you need two. First thing, your election favors the Ethereum proposer. Because the Ethereum proposer is the winner of the Ethereum sequencing rights, because they've been elected by Randall, right? They have the ability to propose. If you would like to be a base rollup, you need to have some sort of election that favors them. In Tycho's case, that means they just win every time. In Gwyneth's case and Spire's case, there will be another auction that has some preference to the Ethereum proposer, but not unilaterally. The other thing is sequencing being derived from the layer one. So the canonical sequence of the rollup is dependent and derived from the canonical sequence of the layer one. So after, that directly implies that finalization and reorganizations are shared across Ethereum and its base rollup. So if this is the same for all layer twos, if Ethereum reorgs to a certain depth, then your layer two will also reorg. In base rollups, your depth is 0. So if Ethereum reorgs, your base rollup will always reorg. And then, of course, finality is reached simultaneously. That means you have to follow forks together. There could be a fork of a base rollup whenever there's a fork of Ethereum. In practice, there's a few things that we do to base sequencing to make it even better. One of these things is a sequencer election mechanism. We talked about this before. Spire uses something similar to execution tickets from layer one research, but there's different teams trying all sorts of different things. The other thing is posting a checkpoint to the layer one. So the way that we derive sequence from layer one is by literally making a layer one transaction that says something about the layer two. Tycho calls this block proposing. We say checkpointing. Gwyneth goes back and forth. The other thing that we can do that's a little more fancy is doing extra things during checkpointing. So this means we could do a swap using layer one liquidity during that checkpoint. And because we are reorging with Ethereum, that means that swap will finalize on both domains at the same time, getting us some atomicity properties. The other thing we can do is share. A lot of sharing happens. We can share checkpoints. I do believe we should share like everything, shared deposits, shared settlement, shared checkpointing or proposing, so on and so forth. This gives us superpowers not only with layer one composability, we can save a lot of costs, but also between base rollups. If we share deposits, we can make a shared proof of the state transition functions of multiple base rollups at the same time, prove this in just one proof on Ethereum, and do interop between those with never touching the Ethereum layer one and therefore having to pay that gas. In the future, we're going to get real-time proving. I categorize real-time proving about the same as Justin, around 200 milliseconds. I think fast proving, maybe 5 seconds to kind of 1 second range, is still really valuable for base rollups. It just has some delay, which is bad for MEV. We have proof aggregation, so taking lots of proofs, turning them into one proof. That saves us a lot of costs. And then, of course, shared deposits, which means we can do interop between base rollups without ever touching layer one. These are all things that Spire, Gwyneth, Nethermind is researching and working on actively. So after all of this, we have seamless composability. So atomic cross-chain contract calls. I'm going to say that again. Atomic cross-chain contract calls. This is a very good user experience. You might have some messy things that need to be abstracted, but we have chain abstraction for that. And then there's also a really good developer experience. So any of us who have tried to build an asynchronous application will know that it's 10 times more difficult than a synchronous application, especially if you're dealing with lots of money and the kind of financial transactions that need a atomicity property. Right, that's base sequencing, that's base rollups. Come talk to me after if you have more questions. The next based thing up here today is preconfirmations. So first, a definition of a preconf or a preconfirmation, a commitment to sequence. Sequence in this context means ordering or inclusion, so some of both. And then that sequence is what is to be added or appended to the chain. So you can tell you have to have the rights to add to the chain if you're going to give out preconfirmations. You have to have some sequencing rights. In the context of a based rollup, a based preconf is a preconf where that sequence is or some state involved with a preconf is that of a base rollup. So the domain of the preconfirmation is a base rollup. The chain is a base rollup. The sequence will be added to the base rollup. It's just a preconf on a base rollup. Now in practice, things get a lot more complicated. So I have up here 3 things. The first over here is what centralized sequencers do. This is one thing they can do, and all of them do it. They give out preconfirmations that are not backed by anything, although that probably doesn't matter because they have massive reputations. And they give them directly to users for their own layer 2s, not base rollups, right? The other thing that we might try when we introduce based sequencing is doing kind of a naive implementation of base preconfirmations where the Ethereum layer 1 proposer gives out all of the preconfirmations directly, so no delegation of any sort. That's not going to work because unfortunately, the kind of proposers that we have to deal with are Raspberry Pis with a dial-up connection. And they do not have the capacity, the bandwidth, the compute, even the state capacity to deal with handing out preconfirmations for the the kind of use cases that we want them for. So I personally believe that every transaction will be preconfirmed at some point in the future, and we cannot route that through an Ethereum proposer. There's a reason we have PBS. And so we go to 3. This is kind of the model that contemporary base preconfirmation research has been building off of. At least it's kind of our endgame vision, where you can see this purple line. The proposer delegates to a gateway. The gateway is the one who gives out preconfirmations, and then gives some builder constraints to the PBS builders, so Titan, et cetera. And then those builders take those constraints, build a block that satisfies those constraints, and then delivers that to the proposer. So in practice, this is similar to PBS, if the gateway is the relay, except that the gateway is given the ability to impose builder constraints on builders and give out preconfirmations. Now, this purple line is like the subject of a ton of debate, and this is probably why I'm giving this talk at LidoConnect, because it's incredibly important to get that purple line right. Because if we get it wrong, there's a possibility we have one gateway that is not necessarily bad, but bad if you do it naively. It's also possible that we have a situation where only some proposers are allowed to use a gateway, so they are given kind of exclusive rights to giving out preconfirmations, and that has the rather unfortunate downside that those proposals will be able to make more yield, and therefore, if it's something like a LST, then that LST will have a lot of power to become dominant. The other thing I want to mention about preconfirmations is searchers and MEV bots. I do not believe will use preconfirmations in this style, nearly at the scale that retail and consumer does. And the simple reason for that is that these builders up here can do that MEV themselves. So if it's sex-to-X arbitrage, they have the ability to extract that themselves. And so they would not want to sell the rights to that arbitrage before the end of the slot, when it's theoretically the most valuable. The proposer in such a world, there's a significant chance they would make less money, as we've seen from some of Nethermind's research lately. That doesn't mean that their kind of total yield will go down, but it does give us a tricky incentive problem. Cool, so the future of base preconfirmations is 4 things. The first is really fast preconfirmations. I think we can get to 100 milliseconds. If we do some funny things with the gateway, we can get that a lot lower. The other thing I think will happen is increasing yield for stakers, solo stakers and staking pools alike. I also think that we will see some complex dynamics form between the payment for preconfirmations. So I have up here apps and users paying for preconfirmations. That's one possible future. The other one that's not on here is base rollups themselves, willing to sponsor users' transactions, give them a preconfirmation, just to give them a better user experience, and kind of a loss leading strategy to get more users on their chain. It's something I'm really excited about for the next few years. The other thing is I believe that we will see solo stakers involved in the preconfirmation process. So not just Lido, not just Coinbase, but also solo stakers. And this is one thing that I think the community still needs to come to agreement about, and it's very important that we can align on this idea that preconfirmation should be for everyone, right? Credible neutrality. Cool. So the first part of this talk was about sequencing, the second was about preconfirmations, and both of these have that first word in front of them, based, right? And I think this word is incredibly important when it comes to ideology, how we all think about doing things, designing blockchain systems and doing things in Ethereum. We have to be very careful about what is kind of our guiding principles? This is something that Ethereum Layer 1 development does terribly, right? You can ask 10 different people what the kind of North Star is of Ethereum, and they'll probably all say different things. Even more worrisome than that, I think, is that if you ask 10 different people what are the values that Ethereum's North Star should align with, you'll get 10 different answers. We have very little communication, public discourse about this, and I want to change that for base rollups and preconfirmations. So the first part of this definition is deconstructing economies of scale to enable parallel innovation while maintaining network effects. And this is something that I believe is incredibly foundational to the rollup-centric roadmap, which is taking the layer 1, building this as a hub for network effects, for liquidity for users to some extent, and building on top of this in parallel with rollups. This is parallel innovation, but the downside of parallel innovation is that it often comes with parallel network effects, right? And parallel network effects are fragmentation, and that's bad for users. It's inefficient, and we will lose to alternative layer 1s unless we can maintain logically centralized network effects. The other thing up here is replicating a monolithic user and developer experience while still establishing infinite expressivity. So we want to give users and developers the feeling like they're on one chain, one environment, right? One part of this is chain abstraction, to be sure. The other part of this is building developer primitives that actually give developers the tools to build things that feel like they're composable, that feel like they're together, right? It's vibes-based for the most part. There's not a technical definition of any of this, but the other thing I want to talk about is infinite expressivity, which is taking the monolithic and developer experience of something like Solana and giving this more expressivity. So with Solana, you can't use, you can add your own precompiles, for example, to the chain. If you had a based app chain, a based rollup, you could modify, add precompiles, you could use a different VM if you'd like, and that gives you the ability to customize and express your developer preferences whilst, again, still maintaining network effects. That's not easy, but we like hard problems in Ethereum. So the last thing about the base ideology is infinite gardens have no walls, base rollups break walls. In practice, based or at least shared sequencing, this is important because to do atomic composability, you need validity proving, and to coordinate validity proving among multiple domains, that's proof aggregation, et cetera, shared sequencing is pretty fundamental, right? You can try to do some coordination between actors that are not economically aligned 100% with each other, but you're always going to be slower than the situation where you have a shared sequencing, right? The other thing is accelerate real-time proving. This is the subject of a lot of my calls in the past few weeks, is figuring out how to make proving a lot faster. The faster the proving, the faster we can compose, like the faster we can get to atomic interactions taking place. And the nice thing about real-time proving as well is that it also makes proof aggregation a lot easier because you don't have to do like multiple steps that each take too long to be practical. The other thing up here is chain abstraction. I believe in chain abstraction being a UX improvement for every user. I don't believe that chain abstraction will be nearly at the scale that a lot of chain abstraction people say it will be. Intents are cool, but they're probably not going to make a lot of money. I think you're going to have a lot of non-venture scale businesses in this vertical. The other thing up here is public goods funding. So one thing that we need to establish as a based ecosystem, preconfs sequencing, is public goods funding, because things like shared deposits contracts, real-time proving, are really, really valuable to every base rollup team, and they're also very hard to monetize without some of the use cases that we can offer. So I believe that there's a great opportunity to do some public goods funding here, fund that research through base rollups, through the base preconfirmation teams, and grow the pie for all of us. This is something I've had talks with Tycho with in the past, and a few other smaller based preconf teams, and I think we're working down that track, but there's still a lot of social pushback on such a system, just like Protocol Guild, just like and Optimism Retro PGF. It's not easy. The other thing up here is the future of the based ideology. Things change, and I believe that my and our personal stance towards base sequencing, based preconfirmations, and the end game for blockchain designs is going to change, right? One of these, though, that I'd like to maintain forever is a sustainable layer 1 network effect. This means, like I said, protocols. This means liquidity. This means some subset of users, and ideally a lot of activity as well. Now, this is absolutely crucial to base sequencing because as we have this parallel innovation taking place, if we have fragmentation to another layer 1, not Ethereum, then every base rollup on Ethereum is losing that network effect, right? So we want to grow the pie together while keeping the pie small for competitors. Now, I believe that app chains or special purpose base rollups make a lot more sense than general purpose base rollups, and in the future at least, maybe not in the short term. And the reason for that is because I believe that this enables more expressivity, right? We talked about infinite expressivity before. Unless you own and control your own execution environment and all the details of an app chain, like service providers that you use, I believe you're adding more intermediaries. The other thing that I like is promoting parallel innovation. And the reason I like parallel innovation is because, like I said before, it gives developers the ability and to innovate in parallel. Of course, we all like that, but also to have some freedom, right? There's a property rights system enforced by layer 1, and this is nice, this is cool, but one downside of such a property rights system on layer 1 is that those property rights only extend to layer 1 trustlessly, right? You always add new trust concern, like introduce new trust assumptions when you move to a layer 2. Maybe censorship, short-term censorship is maybe the best you can get without a base rollup. But parallel innovation, I think, is an important thing to prioritize. The other thing I want to talk about is Ethereum, Ether, as a community rallying point. So we're at a stage where most of the base rollup and base preconfirmation research is taking place on Ethereum, some of it on Ethereum layer 1, some of it with regards to layer 2s, of course. And I think that is something that we should continue. I don't think that's too controversial, but I also want to make the point that ETH as a token is incredibly valuable to base rollups, not only because of the economic security that we get, which may or may not be a meme, but also because of the network effects of that layer 1 token. As one of the biggest, easily the biggest thing on layer 1 is the ETH token, right? You can export this to base rollups, and that's helpful, but using this as a kind of how do I put this? The central focus of network effects of layer 1 gives us the opportunity to build network effects around something that is stable, that has a good monetary policy, and ultimately something that I believe will be around for the long term. Thank you. Stay based.
Thank you. Very base talk. Love the passion, and also thanks for sharing all of the thoughts of yours. I wanted to ask, since we have some time, if maybe there are some questions from the audience. Yes? Okay, I'll come over.
So I have two questions, actually. The first one is, are there any current designs to have base sequencing with state diff-based rollups today, instead of posting state diffs instead of transaction data? And the second question is, when we talk about real-time composability via real-time proving, my understanding is that multiple chains that are composing will have to be sending proofs every slot. So is that economically viable from the perspective of just gas fees, not proving costs, but just the gas fees you have to give over there? Thank you.
Yeah, to your first question, the answer is yes. I know that because we are working on such designs. I am not entirely sure about the other base rollup teams. I would say it's from the conversations I have had, I'd say it's very likely that they're thinking about such things. With such a design, though, you do have to think about the technical complexity, right? And of course, the kind of risk reward with that regard. I think to your second question, the answer is yes. I think that aggregated proving, verification, will be the cost at the limit. Proving time and proving cost, something that I both expect to trend towards zero. And if we create economic incentives to make it more valuable to have lower proving times and lower proving costs, then I believe we will see that even faster. One more tangible point on this is that I believe that we can eventually get to an endgame where adding a base rollup has zero marginal on-chain layer 1 cost, right? And we do this by sharing literally everything: shared deposits, shared settlement, and shared proving. I have a talk at DevCon tomorrow about this. You can find that on the DevCon passport. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. mteam from Spire Labs.